Hey, and welcome back to Lessons in Product Management. I'm your host, John Fontenot, and I just want to say thank you. We're almost at 1,000 subscribers on Spotify, and we have about double the listeners on iTunes, even though their analytics isn't quite as clear. I still see that we have about 50% more listeners on Apple Podcast and Spotify. So that gives me kind of an idea of where we're at for the subscriber count there. So thank you. I'm glad you're enjoying the guests that I'm bringing on. I hope you're enjoying the new solo cast that I'm bringing to you every week, like this one. And let's just keep it going. But with that said, knowing that we're almost at 1,000 followers on Spotify and we're about double the audience on iTunes, I would love if you're listening on an iPhone right now and you're not driving. If you're driving, wait till you're parked. But I would love if you would just, go to the show, scroll down to the bottom, hit the 5 stars, and leave us a review. Because if you're enjoying this, leaving reviews, leaving ratings, that puts us up in the search results. So people are searching for product management podcast, they'll find us more easily. The algorithms do what they do, and you can help us spread the word if you're enjoying these episodes too. So thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoy this episode. So last week we were talking about testing desirability, right? And I made a very general statement about never testing in production, right? There's a lot of risk mitigation that we could do up front through validating that we've truly defined the problem, testing desirability, testing usability, feasibility. Like all those things are processes and practices we use to mitigate the risk of shipping the wrong thing, or even if we're shipping a solution to the right problem, we might be shipping the wrong solution to that problem. And so it's really saying, like, we're going to have some level of assumption, we're going to have some level of risk, but how can we de-risk what we're shipping? And how can we remove as much blatant assumption as possible and get closer to the goal than starting way out here with some crazy, untested assumption that we have no clue if we're even barking up the right tree, right? So I do want to caveat what I said about the dangers of testing in production, right? Because testing in production can be used as kind of a final risk mitigation factor, depending on how you use it, right? So what I was referring to is I want to avoid saying, okay, we made all these assumptions, we haven't tested a thing, and we're just going to ship something to our entire population. I've been a part of a company that did that, and it cost us 6 months of dev effort to go back and redo everything we did and get into a state where we could try again, basically. Like, it took us 6 months just to fix the problem that we created from shipping the wrong thing. It was disastrous, cost a lot of money, and it set us back for where we wanted to go with the product. And so I encourage you not to do that, not just say, oh, this seems like a good idea, let's go build it and ship it, because you have no idea what the ripple effects will be if you don't test it and you don't put it in front of users and go through proper vetting of, are we solving the right problem? Are we solving a problem at all? Or are we creating more problems than we're trying to solve? So those things are problematic when we approach shipping that way. But testing in production isn't always a bad thing, right? And I'll give you an example. So if you go through all these steps of saying we've precisely defined the problem, we've tested desirability through wireframes or whatever, we're on the right track. We went high fidelity, we tested usability, it's usable, it's desirable, and it's feasible, right? So now you get to the time where you're going to ship. That's great. You can still test in production, but don't ship to the entire audience, right? So if you want to do a final test in production, that's fine. But it's kind of a limited launch or something that's feature flagged or launched to a certain percentage of your population, right? So I'll give you an example. Facebook did this not too long ago. They did a complete UI redesign on the web experience. And I logged in one day. They said, hey, do you want to see this new thing? And I said, yeah. So I kind of opted into it. And at first it was kind of different, right? Because a lot of the layout was different, the navigation was different. It was a pretty drastic UI change, and it impacted usability because it took me a while. It was a learning curve to be able to figure it out. But eventually I liked it more than the old version. I actually went back to the old version to check it out. And I'm like, I like this new version better. There's things that I use more often that I can access it more quickly than the previous way I had to navigate to these different places, right? Like I use Facebook groups a lot, and that's primarily what I'm referring to. But I saw the internet blow up whenever Facebook released it to the general population, right? So there's still risk anytime you ship. Like we should know that as product managers. But at least Facebook did a limited launch, got some feedback, and felt like they were making the right choice based on the feedback they got from people like me who were in this kind of beta testing mode with a small subset of the overall audience, right? And I think a lot of the reaction was just the same thing I felt, just amplified, right? Where there was a learning curve to it. And once people get over the learning curve, it ends up becoming a better experience. So sometimes you have to know what the difference is. Is it people not wanting you to interrupt their experience? How disruptive is it to your experience? And can you test key fail points, right? When you're testing in production, how many people stop coming back, right? If people were logging in every day and then you launch this new experience and they haven't come back and it's been a week of testing, that might not be a good indicator, right? But if they're still coming back and they're just slogging through it, right, then you're not churning out customers or churning out users because of it. They're just going through this learning curve and this adoption cycle. And so even though the outcry might be, oh, this is terrible, and why did you change this? This is awful. You might have to rely on some quantitative KPIs, key performance indicators of like, this is what we would consider a success, and this is what we would consider a failure. This is what we should look out for, and this is what we should ignore. And so having a clear definition of success will definitely help throughout the process, from testing, from ideation, and all the way through the solutioning and vetting processes. So with that, I just wanted to circle back and talk a little bit more clearly through what I meant by testing in production is a bad idea. And I hope I clarified that, because if you were listening last week, you were probably you might have been screaming at the podcast saying, no, there's a perfectly valid reason to test in production, and there is. But I just wanted to clarify because it's a bit nuanced with my overgeneralized statement. So hope that helps. And if you're going to test in production, make sure it's a limited launch. If there's still things you're trying to learn that you don't think you learned in the wireframe or the high fidelity mockups, the click-through prototypes, if there's still things that you feel like the assumption is too risky, that's a really good time to test with a limited audience in production. So thanks for joining me this week, and I will see you next week on Lessons in Product Management.